glad to be with you all. It's kind of interesting that I'm here sort of in a different context. I worked for a healthcare company, healthcare system for 40 years. So now I've gone on my own and created a company called Demand Inspired, and I am the CEO, which means the Chief Everything Officer, employee of one. So it's really been a great experience. I really wanted to follow the passion of the idea of what's it take to put together technology to making buildings intelligent. And sort of what are the barriers to how to get that installed? We talk about it a lot. In fact, in Tennessee, they had the outbreak of cicadas. They had the 13-year, 70-year cicadas all came out at the same time. It was so noisy you couldn't even hear yourself talk when you stepped outside. Bugs flying everywhere. And sometimes I think we talk about intelligent building, there's a lot of noise, but not a lot of things happening. So I want to encourage us as we talk about today, what are some of the things that we can deal with? Before I start, though, I want to give a quick pause on a shout out to HealthSpaces. I thought it was great when Michael McCarthy talked about the HFIF, Healthcare Facility Innovative Forum. Hard to say that, isn't it? HFIF, or how do you pronounce that? But I like HealthSpaces, that's great. And so first time I ever presented on a shag carpet stage, so I really like this as well. So I just hope I don't trip, so I'll have to be a little more careful on that. So what are we talking about today? I mentioned this a little bit in my introduction. So I want to have us work through this idea of where do we put our mind today as we think about this? This came from Seth Godin. It talks about how people think of things, and I'll start with the lower left-hand corner. Are you curious? And if you're curious, that kind of is an area, maybe you're a flexible inquiry and there's some ignorance to it, but you're curious about it. Foolish is you're ignorant and you have strongly held beliefs. Now, I think we've all been guilty of being foolish at times. Let's be very candid. Raise your hands if you've ever been foolish. Okay, well, good, but at least that's the first step of moving to the next side of being professional. So I'll tell you what, I really want somebody professional that is designing bridges. I don't want them to kind of mess around with some innovations. Let's try this and see how it works out. So you really want to have a professional that has strongly held design beliefs and has expertise. But today I'm taking to another quadrant. Innovator, we're going to have expertise yet flexible inquiry that we're talking about in our series of conversations today. So as you think about these 5 areas of things I want to talk about with you this morning is I want to take you through this journey of thinking about fly your building like an airplane. Is saving energy and cost a ridiculous idea? The art science of repairs and maintenance precision, and the cruelty of aging facility assets, and how does your sustainability fit into all of this? So let's buckle up and here we go. So if you imagine generative AI created this image for me, it's kind of fun, a flying building. I don't think there's many out there, so here's what it came up with. And if you looked inside of the cockpit of what this might look like, this is another generative look at all the dials and gauges that would help you understand how to fly your building if there was such a thing that existed. But I say all that as the backdrop of coming to this question, is saving energy cost a ridiculous idea? And think of that idea of flying an airplane, flying a building, as we kind of walk through this. Is it a ridiculous idea? Because sometimes I wonder if we think it's ridiculous because of the actions that we do versus what we talk about. And it's important to talk about this. This is actual data from the Energy Information Administration, EIA. And this chart that I received, you can show you that in the years of 2022, 21, 22, and 23, 22% increase in energy costs. That's just on the kW per H power cost. That doesn't include demand charge and other things with it. So I know companies that have they've seen their budgets go up by tens and tens of millions of dollars. I guess if you take everybody here and look at their inflation rate of utility costs, I think it'd be a staggering cost. Interestingly, I went to this same site before I got here and said, let me get the updated information. The chart wasn't there anymore, and the data stopped at 2022. I'm not sure there's a conspiracy there. They don't want to admit the high cost of inflation of utility costs, but I couldn't get an updated graph. But nonetheless, it is real, and it is growing. It is becoming more intense. In fact, we're very familiar with the energy bill. Looks like the old telephone bill. Try to understand this if you're trying to look at it. And as you look at it, you'll see all these various charges, demand charge, energy charge. Now they're looking at even doing metered kVA charges, and so capacity charges, time of day charges. It's becoming very complex. And so you have to get your mind wrapped around understanding your building. If you don't understand it, how do you take any action toward that bill? And the utility companies are helping some, but not very much. So it's something to think about as you consider that. So as you think about looking at these visualization of things, this is how we kind of look at how we see data sometimes. We don't understand or can see how it really works. But if we look at how it is, we add some color to it, we see a whole nother element of things about what's being performed. So we move to the idea of how we typically see utility bills, and that is we see a simple gauge. This is your simple monthly utility bill that you get, and you study this and say, how much did I spend 6 weeks later and try to understand it. Well, really, we need to see something more like these sorts of gauges in our building to understand what direction is the building going, how well is it going, how efficient is it working, real time. So this is an example of what happens real time, and that when people don't address things. My son was in South Africa, and when I was there, I took this picture, and this is actually during a load shedding event in which, at this particular time, 2023, 278 load shedding events in that country. Then you look back earlier to 2020, it's 54 load shedding events. So as you can see, it's really changed, become an issue with not managing your power, and you have to think about that from a utility grid standpoint. So how do we become more participative in that? So let me move us to an analogy of healthcare, because that's what we're about, and we look at the nervous system. And I want to have us look through the electrical distribution system, for example. If you could really understand how your building uses power at the granular asset level, what would you know, what would you learn? So with LoRaWAN, there's a brand new technology, pretty new in the United States. As you can see here on the diagram, there is this new technology called LoRaWAN. How many have heard of LoRaWAN? Pretty new, pretty new. But it is an amazing breakthrough technology that is changing the Internet of Things sensor market. As you heard Nick Webb speak about last evening, he was telling us that the key thing is we need more data. So really, if you think about whatever it is a sensor is just a means to the method of how you want to get data to be ingested by some system to help you with the analysis. So the way I kind of refer to all these sensors out there is we're kind of like, you're trying to, this data outfitters, just like there's outfitters in a sporting goods store, you got to figure out how do I get all this data coming in to analyze it. So LoRaWAN is a breakthrough. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit about that by definition. Here's the definition of what LoRaWAN is. It's a low power wide area network that really is powered by powering the Internet of Things. And so it's really changing how sensor technology works. And to give you an idea of that, I went and spoke as a keynote speaker in Amsterdam when this was sort of began to rolling out last year, and met the inventor of LoRaWAN, was Oliver Settler. He's the person that invented this new communication protocol. And to give you an idea how fast it is growing, at the conference, it'll show you here that it's gone 10x size as far as it's being the protocol for Internet of Things radio frequency processes. So, and you can see on the left there of the slide, there's all these devices like a device wall that shows you all the devices that are quickly being created. With the Things Network, that's this organization that sponsors this event, they have 1,500 devices that are configured to LoRaWAN. So it's really exploded the opportunity that just currently did not exist. So let me give you a very specific example when you think about monitoring electrical power and why that's a real powerful thing. Kind of like the nervous system, you're looking at the nervous system of your building to see how your devices are using energy. So right here I have an electrical submeter. That's how small it is. You clamp it on a wire, it self-harvests the power and runs right inside the electrical panel, and you're able to quickly, within 2 minutes, start reading data. Traditionally, what you'd have to do is maybe shut the power off, run wires to the side of the panel, hook it all up, and take quite a bit of time. So imagine 2 minutes to 4 hours. Imagine a cost that's a fifth the cost of traditional electrical submetering. I say all that because IoT is now providing us the ability to do things much better than we could be doing in the past. I gave a presentation on IoT 10 years ago, and I couldn't believe the change of where it is today. So let me give you some use cases now that I want you to think about why monitoring power real time is important. So let's take a surgery suite, for example. One of the areas in which I've been involved with thousands of these sensors installed. So here's one monitoring power going into a couple of operating rooms. For this particular operating room, you can tell the shaded area is when the actual recorded time the operating procedure started and it ended. Usually that's going to be a nurse that will say start procedure, end procedure, and then that will be the window of time that's documented. And then looking at the power flow, you can see when the power changes based on the usage. So as you can imagine, when a procedure begins to start, power consumption goes up, and then when it finishes, power consumption goes down. So now you have the ability to control HVAC systems. You have the ability to understand how our power is being used. You understand how the case workflow is moving through the surgical suites. And the area on the right is kind of interesting because they must have left everything on when they walked out of the OR, it looks like, from this particular example, kind of like your kids leave the lights on in the house. So another example of seeing maybe some energy opportunities that are neglected over time. Let's look at elevators next. Elevators is interesting because if you think about it, not many elevator companies are looking at how they use power real time, but if they did, what would you learn from that? You would learn that how often they're used, the frequency, the run time. You look for anomalies of how maybe there was an entrapment or something strange about this particular elevator, how it's being operated. Just again, by getting its signature look on the graph. So here's a graph of several elevators. Power consumption, you can imagine, you can see the power spike and then down as those elevators are moving through the campus. Another area is imaging equipment. If you think about if you were to monitoring imaging equipment, what would that look like with electrical submetering? Again, not many of the manufacturers are doing that. They have equipment you can buy as optional equipment, but how do you do it cost effectively? So as you look at this particular MRI, this is a newer one. You can see the green is where the actual cases are happening, and they're actually using the MRI to do the scans. Crazy story about MRIs. I was talking to an MRI tech, and I said, what's the craziest story you've ever had happen or heard about happen with an MRI? So you have to know the MRI is the magnet is always on, always magnetized. They said that one patient came in, and you're supposed to have just your clothing on for your exam and socks. Well, they didn't realize apparently this person forgot they had a handgun in their sock. They went into the MRI tube. The magnet pulled the gun. Of course, their legs shot up to the top of the magnet. The gun discharged, hit the top of the tube, ricocheted off, just missed him and just missed the tech. So I said, you got to be careful with metal. And I thought, wow. But you don't want to quench a magnet. Have you ever heard about that term in MRI? You quench a magnet, that means you got to have an emergency, hit the red button. They then demagnetize it, and that you just cost $30,000 when you hit that button because you got to recharge the system and reboot it. But anyway, here's this MRI, and you can see the usage pattern in green. And the top line is how the chiller is used to keep the magnet cool. So you can clearly see the cycles of when things happen and then when it shuts down. So again, data to go back to the manufacturers and talk with them about how to use electrical data. So that's the value of having that granular data by having several sensors installed. But how do you use that information? You think about the art and science of repairs and maintenance. You may be familiar with this triangle. It's kind of like if you want to look at maintenance as corrective, preventative, predictive, and prescriptive, but you look at it kind of also based on your risks. So the lower the risks, you can just kind of wait till it breaks to fix it because it's too expensive to put sensors or equipment on it. However, if it's very high risk, you'd want to have prescriptive maintenance so it doesn't break, doesn't fail, doesn't put a business interruption in front of you. So if you think about it simple, we've talked about this before, was mentioned about air filtration maintenance. If you think about air filters, they're usually based on a schedule. What if you had the number of sensors in there and the motor horsepower, motor usage, plus airflow through the unit? Now you have the ability to watch the airflow through the unit and then determine when is the best time to change filters. So you can really get the full life of the unit using the filters versus replace them too early or too late. So this is where the data starts to come into place, because now you can say, now they got data coming in for this air handler, for example, for all these sensor points, I can actually calculate the thermodynamic efficiency of that air handler unit. Once I know that, then I can look at and watch it and compare it to other air handler units and see which ones are operating more efficiently than others. But then you take it up another level by using some AI around environmental optimization. You look at all your air handlers, your chillers, your pumps and everything and say, as a system, how am I working as an operational kind of thing? Because you've always heard about the case you could fix one problem but create two at the same time or more. Well, this is where you want to look at the system, because you can save energy by looking at the whole system, because that's really what spins the meter figuratively. The guy coming in from the utility company is all power in. So as you think about, you need to shift, the mindset needs to begin to shift to how we think about doing maintenance. I mean, there's been kind of a lot of talk about, doing more for less, and then recently do less for less. I think most people sign up for that, but they say, how would I do less for less? Well, how you do that is you have precise, more minimal maintenance based on data that drives what needs to be done and don't oversubscribe what has to happen. So machine learning, high performance buildings, IoT sensor that are added will help get you there much faster and replace traditional maintenance with prescriptive maintenance. And there's also going to be that got cut off there, a new service technician ecosystem. So if you think about the job of the future, buildings in healthcare I've seen seem to have two main categories. You have those that are maintenance technicians and those that are system technicians. So maintenance are kind of transactionally based, doing the things that break and fix and keeping the place running and have stat response, whereas system techs can do more of the system stuff that we're talking about here to be proactive and prescriptive in nature that have a higher level of complexity. And that would be a skill set that could be actually crowdsourced or shared services across an organization. So there's the cruel reality of aging assets. There's no one that gets excited about their stuff in their facilities getting old. I can't, do you know any CFOs? I just can't wait till I have to put an air handler. I've been waiting for that. I've been looking for a place to spend $1 million. Where can I spend it? Oh, great, a new air handler. No, they don't want to do that at all. So as you think about aging facility assets, the key is having your eye on it to see how it is doing so you can be as proactive to extend the service life and help your cash flow. My son is a ophthalmologist. He's a retina surgeon. And I said, Eric, how do you, when you look into the eye, what kind of health issues can you see? Is it a couple dozen or whatever? I said, no, Dad, that's a lot more. Let me send you a list. So he said, these are all the things you can see by looking into the eye. And there's a lot. And it made me start to think about if you can do that, the health of a person visually, if we can see inside of the building the same way, we begin to see what is going on so we can react to that. If you remember from last night's presentation, Nick Webb was talking about once they did this huge survey of all the employees, they had all these ideas coming in to save money. Well, this is kind of another way of thinking about it from the standpoint, if I have a lot of information coming in, I can then really drive down to the root cause and solve those kinds of problems. Last thing I want to talk about with time remaining is how does sustainability fit into all of this? And, energy efficiency isn't that attractive, but renewables are great. It's the technology, which I love renewables. I've been working on them for 20-some years, so I think they're great, but sometimes we don't really pay attention to energy efficiency, do we? I've had opportunity to speak with Amory Levins, and I really like the phrase he came up with, that a watt of energy not used through energy conservation or the use of energy efficient products. And I thought, isn't that neat? If you could just not use it in the first place, that's the purest form of sustainable renewable energy that there is. So how do you achieve your environmental goals through these financial resiliency efforts? Because I've heard several people talk about it's a financial decision. How do you make those sorts of decisions? And I want to give you a perspective. Now, you can check me on some of this math, and it may not be exactly precise, but it should give you an idea, because there's a lot of variables to come to this. But there is one thing. There is 1 kilowatt of energy. It's 8,766 kilowatt hours a year, right? If you think about how do I generate that power, of course, I do get 6.2 metric tons of CO2 equivalent from that, but I have to install 10 solar panels with battery storage because I have to have 24/7 of 1 kW, so no power at night, so I've got to store the energy, use it all night. Then I'll have to, in that particular case, I'll have to, if I put reduced energy costs, I will reduce the emissions required to generate the power to make those solar panels and reduce landfill waste as well. So if you think about how, if I could just leave this conference, if I could reduce 1 kilowatt of energy at my hospital, how would I think about that? And that's through making favorable ROI investment. It's still a financial decision to make. That doesn't change anything. And you want to, through that, you're improving the life cycle of the equipment by it operating better, and it's much faster ROI than installing some of these systems, much easier and quicker to do. So invest in reducing energy conservation first, then augment with renewables. So it's a 1-2 punch. Do those things together, reduce your load, then go after what you can't reduce anymore for with renewables. So I want to leave you, so I'm up here for 20 minutes speaking, and there's a thing called the forgetting curve, right? You may have heard of this before, that after I walk up the stage, after the end of the day, you forgot 50 to 80% of what I said. That's encouraging, right? And then after about 30 days, you'll remember maybe 3% of what I said. That's real encouraging. So all I say is I want to leave you with some things that are important to think about. Going back to what I started off with, just remember, take this whole idea of thinking about flying your buildings, take energy conservation seriously, think about how it can be dealt with in a very financial basis, and put some real good thought to it. As you think about costs, they really stack up. That MRI picture I showed you earlier, that costs about $25,000 to $30,000 in electrical power just to run one. So as you think about how to make that happen over time, you can multiply those savings by looking through your entire campus and doing the best that you can with that. So with that, thank you for your time. A lot to cover in a very short period of time. I'm open for questions after the event, and we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much.